Hi everyone, this is Ing, and I am trying to get this thing on Instagram Live. Hopefully it's gonna work. Hey, I see we got some people now. We are gonna be joined by Sara Raza, who is a dear friend and a wonderful curator. We'll get her to join in a little bit, and in the meantime, I'm going to talk to you guys about what I do a little bit, why I'm doing this, and then we'll have a really nice, brisk 30-minute conversation with Sara Raza. So my name is Ingru Chen, and those of you who don't know me, tell me where you're streaming from. First of all, that would be awesome. I'd love to know which city or country, what time zone you're in. I know it's kind of early for some people, but I wanted to do this earlier in the day so that I could get my butt up in the morning and not have to deal with kind of like a late start to my day and feel sluggish. It's really easy to feel sluggish. So I'm streaming from Boston, the Boston area. And it's actually a beautiful day today, whereas yesterday we had trees falling down and loss of power. So I'm super happy that we are not dealing with that, because some people near me do not have Wi-Fi or electricity today. So I hope those people are all going to be safe. Hey, Sha from NY. Hi, everyone. This is so cool. So this program is called Praise You, and it is inspired thanks to my wonderful husband Devin, who reminded me of this song. It's inspired by this Fatboy Slim song from the 90s, which, if you guys aren't aware, is an amazing video as well, where Spike Jonze is dancing in the middle of a movie cinema lobby, and it was kind of this like original flash mob guerrilla style video that ended up being this cult classic. And when I reminded myself of the lyrics, I was like, that's exactly how I want to feel right now. I want to celebrate the people I know. Yayoi, hashtag Fatboy Slim. I want to celebrate the people I know, and I want to hear their stories of how they're doing. I've been calling friends, which has been amazing. I'm still doing it on a private one-on-one basis. But I kind of realized that some of my friends have really interesting stories to tell. So Sara Raza is one of them, and I'm going to get her to join right now. We'll just wait for her to come on, and then we will get started on our program. Hi, Sara.
How are you?
I'm
Hello.
fine. Good
How
morning.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. You guys give a thumbs up if you can hear us both okay. Yeah? Awesome. So, Sara, tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from New York.
Lovely. And how is it out there today?
Today is a beautiful day also. It's a beautiful spring day, and a lot of calm silence, which has become the norm of late.
Hey, Jen. It's so nice to see some of our really nice, lovely old friends from way back when on this platform, and Karen, and this is great. This makes my heart burst. And we have some people that we don't know, which is also wonderful. So I'm hoping that, we kind of bring this community together in a way that we haven't been able to before. And I never felt inspired to do Instagram Live, except on my private account, where I show people how my Taiwanese mom made food. But now this is kind of one of those moments that, like, improvisation is okay, to be a little messy is okay. And I wanted all of us to feel empowered to be able to tell our story a little bit. And so I've known you for so long. I'm going to give people a super brief introduction of how we know each other, and I'll let you do the same for yourself. So Sara Raza is someone I've known since, I believe, 2002. And you joined as my intern at the Asian Society with Karen at the Asian Society in New York, and you took a summer internship. You were in London, and we became friends. Even though I was your supervisor, I was really like a year, maybe not even a year older than you. And then you were at the Tate Modern as a public programs curator for a while, and then you moved to New York a few years ago, and you joined the Guggenheim. and now you're an independent curator. So I'm going to leave it to you to kind of give us a brief overview of your work, because I know that you've kind of, you and I have both gone in a direction that's similarly entrepreneurial but creative, and at around the same time. So I want to talk about that today too.
Yeah, so it's been 18
Wait,
years.
sorry, one more thing. What are we drinking for caffeine?
Oh, I'm having no caffeine, unfortunately. It's chamomile tea. I haven't had caffeine for 1.5 years.
Oh my God.
Barring green tea. Green tea.
Well, that's caffeine.
Yeah,
that's pretty
caffeine.
strong.
No coffee.
Yeah, no coffee. I am drinking my Japanese boss coffee.
Oh, la, la.
This is my second cup. I'm actually going to open it and pour it over some ice, okay? All right, tell us about you, Sara Raza.
Okay, well, as Ru Chen mentioned, we've known each other for 18 years. It's going that strong, and I was an intern in New York when I was doing my master's degree in 2002 and writing on Iranian theatre that the Asia Society was hosting. And so fast forward, I went on to become a professional curator for my art historical master's, and worked at Tate Modern, worked at Haus der Kultur in Berlin, worked in Azerbaijan at Yarat, worked in Tashkent for the Tashkent Biennale, worked in the UAE on multiple projects, and really amassed a sort of global rhetoric and global practice, and looking at art practice beyond the borders of Europe and North America. And then I decided that much later in my life, I would come back to an institution after 7 years of independent work between leaving Tate Modern and joining Guggenheim. And it was a great opportunity. I became the UBS curator for the third and final phase of the Global Art Initiative. And it was a wonderful opportunity to augment the collection and also bring in curatorial scholarship from a non-Western perspective, which is my mandate. And that's been a wonderful experience. I decided to stay on in New York, and as Ming mentioned, that we both decided to forge an entrepreneurial path. So after leaving the Guggenheim, I consolidated my practice to establish a studio, sort of a business model that encapsulated all of my work, my curatorial work, my teaching, my consultancy, and my publishing work. And that sort of became an umbrella term under punk Orientalism, which is sort of a term for everything I do. It's my sort of ethos. It's my PhD research. It looks at nonconformity. It's the way I go about looking at concepts of resistance and thinking about Orientalism, how the West looks at the East. So that's really a way to umbrella everything. But as an entrepreneur, it sort of became interesting because fundraising for institutions switched to fundraising for myself, working on a profit model, but then still being asked to work as if I'm in the nonprofit industry. Is sort of interesting dichotomy. I'm sure you know.
Yeah. No, there is the mixture now of nonprofit, and you have to be entrepreneurial no matter what. And as we all know, nonprofits are dealing with fundraising, in the same ways that startups are and established companies are. So, we're both kind of taking our skill sets from those experiences and adapting it to what the current world is dealing with. And, something we can touch on later is how we might be able to use that as we emerge out of the coronavirus pandemic in this situation. But first of all, I also want to ask, how are you doing on a general level? Are you safe? Are you healthy? Are you okay?
Well, thankfully, all of the above. But just in terms of this idea of self-isolation, it's not the first time that I've self-isolated. When I'm working on a huge project, when I'm working on a thesis or a book, it tends to be like multiple weeks, maybe only going out once in the day, or not even that sometimes,
Yeah.
So I'm kind of used to this method, but we're under extraordinary circumstances where you can't avoid that there is death, there is pain, there is a great deal of loss around us. Especially there was a period in New York where the only thing I could hear were sirens and birds and nothing else.
Has that changed at all the last couple of days?
In the last few days, it's dramatically shifted. And obviously, we've seen the result of that there's an increase in death toll, but then there's a decrease in people being admitted. So on one hand, that's a positive, but on the other hand, it's deeply saddening at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, the morale...
I'm glad to hear. Yeah. No, New York is powerful right now. And, as you know, but some of you don't, I left New York on a full-time basis in August of this past summer. So I missed New York, and I was there 1 month ago and haven't been able to go back, and I can't wait to go back. For those of you who are joining right now, just as a reminder, this is Sara Raza, a curator that is going to talk to us about her global practice. And you're on the Praise You Instagram Live, the very first one. And we'll have questions for Sara at the very end. So you feel free to comment, tell us how good our hair looks, that sort of stuff.
I actually did my hair today.
I actually looked in my closet today for the first time, and I was like,
exactly. I think you got me to wear a dress today. I haven't.
Well, this is another thing. I was like, I kind of need to feel semi-normal, at least from the top half, right? I am wearing so.
It's usually pajamas on the bottom. If I'm feeling fancy, a pair of heels under the.
Yeah, Yo-Yobi says we both have great hair days. Thanks, girl.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
and then lip.
Oh yeah, well Jen, it's a ponytail because I missed my last haircut appointment in New York, and that was like 5 months ago. It's really bad. It's getting to be a problem.
I don't know how.
Sara, so they're saying you're a bit quieter, so maybe you have to.
Okay, can you hear me a little bit better
project
now?
A little bit more.
Augmenting. So I'm not wearing my headphones because I'm charging at the same time.
It's okay. We'll keep going. So, let's go on to your practice. So you having this specialty, although you curate and organize shows on a global level across all disciplines and genres, but you're a contemporary art curator, and your focus, at least at the Guggenheim, was the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah.
So your practice is global. I mean, you are constantly traveling. You are constantly working on, biennials and projects that take you across the ocean. You're on airplanes almost all the time. So this is, besides when you're at home writing or finishing up some work, this is a radical shift for you in terms of how you practice and how you are able to connect with the visual art world. Do you find that, with this pandemic and how things are shifting more online, is this something that you'll be able to adapt as you go into the future, as we emerge out of this?
Well, I'm very much interested in the idea of connectivity in general and sort of future models of that. As a lot of the work takes place, the lot of research takes place in isolation anyway, and then going abroad. It's funny, I feel that I go out of the country more than I do out of the city. So I probably travel every month out of America than I do statewide, countrywide, so to speak.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to shift, but a lot of the work that I'm doing, thankfully, is stuff that I was doing prior to COVID-19, working on my own book, my teaching, which is adapted completely.
Right. Just so people know, you're teaching a course at SV, the School of Visual Arts this
exactly.
semester.
I joined the faculty in January for the School of Visual Arts. I teach on the master's contemporary curatorial program, and I devised a course on collecting practices, which I'm doing entirely on Zoom. And of course, it's an interesting sort of approach, and I do try to sort of diversify. I bring in guests into my classes. We'll break the monotony that way, so there's not just my voice. There are other sort of voices, and it's much easier to coordinate actually than it would be in live. But in terms of the other work that I'm doing, of course, some things have been impacted, others have been pushed, and I'm being told for some curatorial projects. I'm currently working with Ahmed Matter, the Saudi artist who I've worked with for a number of years, and he was also in the Guggenheim map project in the collection as well. So with our project in Riyadh, it was supposed to be in November during G20. So we are sort of going to reassess that in July, but we're working as if that's happening. Obviously, the sort of solitary work in the artist studio and in sort of my work, there is a sort of synergy there of how we already work. So there's not too much affected there. And then there are projects that I was already working on that are into the future. And then there are things that are just emerging now that, I can't really go into much detail of, but it's interesting how at a certain time, skills are sort of being asked to be transferred. So even if you're used to a certain methodology of working, with our current situation, we're being forced to think otherwise.
Right. And so have you had a lot of dialogue with some of these partners and collaborators about how the practice or your work is going to shift?
Of course. And one of the things about curatorial work and sort of art historically rigorous work is that it's a long research process, as it is. So you spend typically 2 years researching a sort of thorough exhibition. 1 year is a fast track, right? That is when you know your subject very, very well. But normally it's a long process of research. And that, in some senses, it's really funny because this year I'd said to my other friend that, and I also said it to you, that this year, for some reason, I said to you in January, it's not going to be a glamorous year. It's going to be a very slow year. And this, I was talking about myself. I didn't realize that I was making a global prediction for everybody that it was going to be a slow year, that I had to catch up. I had to finish my PhD thesis. I had to finish my book. I had to finish all the things that I put on hold for the Guggenheim. And I had to sort of come back and, sort of wrap up, so to speak. And then, of course, our world has gone topsy-turvy and upside down now.
Right. So it's interesting. I mean, it seems like you are actually quite well prepared in some ways for what's happened. One of the things, and kind of, this isn't about your curatorial practice, but just about what's happened with our world in general, with politics, with the xenophobia. I remember when Trump, used the words China virus in his press conference. And you were the first one to message me and say, this is exactly what's happened after 9/11. This is, because as a Muslim, you kind of understood immediately what this was going to feel like for Asian Americans. And I feel it too. And I feel that, I feel very safe online here with people like you and my community. But there have been times when, I go out into the world and I feel that someone might attack me, honestly, because of the way I look. There was so much wonderful and really insightful art that was made after 9/11 or in response to it. As you know, I was at the Asia Society at the time, and there was this incredible need for Americans to understand, where people were calling in saying, where's Pakistan? Can you talk to us about the Taliban? There's somewhere that, the art world and culture, I mean, a lot of people see it as a necessity or as a luxury, right? If you collect art, that is certainly a luxury in many respects. But then there's also the elements of just visual culture and what it represents and how it can, bring insights or, I don't know. I mean, it was just interesting kind of thinking about the parallels you were bringing in as, kind of a personal experience, but then also me thinking about how the museum had to shift the work that it was doing because of what was happening in the world. So do you see your work as well? Like, are you thinking of any shows, or are you looking at artists now that are responding to what's happening now, or do you feel like it's too soon and we're not there yet?
Perhaps this issue of xenophobia isn't a new one. The work that I'm currently researching is sort of looking at the last 40 years from 1979 onwards. And 79 was a sort of really important year for Iran because it was the year of the revolution. It was also the same year that Afghanistan was invaded by the Soviet Union, and then the war that ensued between Russia and Afghanistan, which was like a proxy war. Really it was the West against communism, if you like, So it was a sort of response to the Cold War, being a sort of proxy war, something happening over there and not happening over here. So, this is not a new sort of language and phenomena that we're experiencing in terms of xenophobia. But of course, artists respond as astutely as possible. They are the voice of our consciousness, if you like. I like to always think of their practices and enabling us to sort of think about the world in a completely new way. And visual culture allows us to sort of respond. But of course, artists in general respond to social issues. I mean, this pandemic is just, as we were discussing last night, is just another example of SARS or Middle Eastern respiratory virus. It's just a different strain. So these viruses have an underlying cause, but then I'm interested in the sort of social virus, if you like. And we've also discussed that before, sort of ideological terms of viruses, which racism being one of them is a key sort of component of that. And this one affects the body, right? That one affects the mind. And it affects our social interaction of how we respond. And artists sort of help us to think about that. And when they come into the museum context, that shifts. Obviously it's an art context. They're not politicians, they're not healthcare workers, they're not medical professionals, but they are providing us with a sort of alternative lens into dissecting many of these issues. And I find that fascinating, and sort of using allegorical languages as well. Using poetry, visual poetry is sort of fascinating. But of course, we're facing an unfortunate moment in our society where we're going to see, the rearing of racism. It's going to be connected to sort of economic desires as well, and other forms. And we see it on a national level now. We sort of see it when it's broadcasted by the head of, the commander of chief of this country. And it's obviously disgusting and deplorable. And that kind of language has no sort of, resonance in any civil society. And I emphasize the term civil.
Yes, exactly. Well, there was this really interesting, I think it was an op-ed in the New York Times at the beginning of the pandemic here in the U.S. talking about, or kind of making the case that, artists should not be expected to create brilliant art at this time. And I found it interesting because when this first happened and we experienced the lockdown, I was like, oh man, we're going to see some great opera and poetry and music and visual art, and that still might be true, and obviously I would love to see all those things, but this kind of had the writer was saying that without a solid support for artists on a fundamental economic level, at least in the United States, how can you expect artists to create on that level? A lot of artists, and some of whom we're going to speak with over the course of the next few weeks, are dealing on a hourly basis with applying for aid and applying for financial support and just kind of being mired in all of the red tape and confusion that's happened. So how do you have time, right, to create your brilliant art while you're trying to figure out where your money is going to come from over the next few weeks? How do you feel about that?
Well, obviously, economic constraints are, awful when it comes to creative input. I don't think that anybody can really creatively sort of thrive in an environment where there's scarcity in this response, and there's a worry and there's a fear of, not knowing what's going to happen. A lot of freelancers and a lot of independent people work paycheck to paycheck or project to project, and definitely artists supplement their careers with teaching if they're fortunate to do so, or art, other art affiliated sort of work as well. And, obviously a lot of that has come to a halt now. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is revisiting, rereading, and also through my teaching, I'm revisiting concepts and ideas that I did 20 years ago. So rereading some of the books that I have read when I was doing my master's, when I was sort of doing my methodology course for my PhD. So it's a lot of returning to ideas. Sort of, I like to think of it like a return inquiry. So you're going back and inquiring on something that you previously overlooked. So there's a lot of resetting and rethinking going on. So I find that really important. But in terms of artists, to answer fully your question, I can only sympathize with what they're going through. And, obviously organizing digital exhibitions and digital platforms isn't going to necessarily substitute for actual physical exhibitions and that lived experience. But I think as curators and cultural workers, and what you're doing especially, is sort of providing platforms so people can actually share their ideas and speak through some of these sort of key concerns. But I think we just need to sort of stay as mentally strong as we're trying to physically stay strong as possible.
So Mac Primoge, actually, we can start going into questions, but before questions, you just talked about books. Is there a really good book or something you're reading right now that you would recommend? Because I'm in need of recommendations.
I'm reading a fantastic book right now. I'm reading
Silk
Road
by
Frank Copan, and it's so amazing. It's sort of a relook into history. He's a scholar. He's sort of remapped the whole region from the Byzantine period, going through, traversing Middle East and Central Asia, and going into Asia proper as well. And
Yeah.
it's actually fascinating to sort of, and he's a beautiful writer. So it's a historical text.
Yeah.
But it sort of, his writing is very beautiful. So it's a good read.
Nice. My friend Sophie says it's so good. Sorry?
It's a dense read, but definitely worth
it. It looks a little dense, but you know, you're one of the most academic people I know. Eugenie agrees it's a great book. So come on, we got multiple people vouching for it. I don't have the book in front of me, but I actually borrowed a book from my local public library because I want to support my library. And I was on a long wait list. It's Ted Chiang's Exhalations. It's his collection of short stories. He's one of my favorite sci-fi writers. And I finally got the book after waiting 2 months, and this is a week before the lockdown. But they said, because this is so in demand, you have to return this in 3 weeks. And I was really stressed out because then the lockdown happened. I'm I can't, my mind is just not there. But because the libraries are all closed now, I have the book. It keeps getting extended. So I have the book for 4 months.
Now you're a delinquent.
No. They're saying your return date has been extended.
Oh, good. Because I keep getting letters from the library saying that you have to pay for the books that you did not return. I'm are you supposed to return them? You should return them. Support your local library. I do. I mean, but I have, let's say permanent loans with libraries, which is terrible. Right. And I do return books, but at the moment I have an excuse, a legitimate excuse. Yeah. Well, Sarah and I, last year, we spent a really good day at the Met Library, which is one of my favorite places. It's also one of my favorite Instagram accounts, and I recommend everyone go check it out because you can just spend a day with rare books, and some of them are also rare artist editions, cool art projects, and they just, you take it out and they bring it to you, and you just sit with it. It's great. So in the few minutes we have left, is there anyone who wants to ask Sarah a question or just have a short dialogue? I know this is weird. People saying things. Yeah. Which I was trying to make eye contact with you at the same time. So I know. I think Mac, our friend Mac Primo, had said something when we were talking about artists and the difficulty now with financial stability. He said that's always been true, which I completely agree with. Right now, what did you say, Mac? He said it was something more like the conceptual abyss, which I think is really, really interesting too, because the first few weeks of the pandemic, first of all, I was so busy trying to get my kids' lives in order with, homeschooling, but then also just where's my head? I don't know. I don't know how I should be feeling. And every day was something new. So yeah, what do you think about that concept of the conceptual abyss? Is that something that you can relate to or you want to address for artists? Well, that's a really interesting sort of way to phrase it, but definitely it's one of those unfortunate things that keeps rearing its head throughout different periods. Obviously artists and thinkers and philosophers, poets, I think about all artists in this general, are the first to sort of sense things in society, first to respond through their practices, and unfortunately also the first to suffer and to be censored as well. And, money is also a form of censoring. If you're not able to access funds, you also fall within that category as well. It's a very difficult moment, but it's one that definitely artists will persevere through, but they need support. There is no curator without an artist, right? There's no publication, art publication without artists, so forth. So we sort of really need to shift that dynamic of having at least some sort of reciprocity and thinking. Interesting. Yeah, reciprocity for me is sort of key. If there isn't that in any relationship, working or personal or otherwise, it's a disaster. Right. It's interesting. So in the comments, we have a couple artists, and one of whom we're going to speak with in a few days, Susan Chen, who is finishing up her MFA at Columbia. My cousin. I wish we were real cousins. But, so some artists are just saying, just create whatever, make simple art, make art that doesn't, have no pressure. And then others are saying it's a moment of observation. And I think both are valid. My husband, for those who don't know me, he's a writer. And there are times when he just will get in a bath for an hour, and that's actually work for him. He's that's a really productive time. Whereas for me, if I'm in the bath,
I'm brain dead. But he'll come out of, a moment or an hour or two of silence and then just like get it out in writing. And so I think of that maybe for some artists as like a micro version of what we're going through now. But yeah, there are all sorts of ways, or as Mario is saying, he made a mask. Other artists, I work with a gallery in Boston, and a lot of those artists are transferring their skills to doing things that are helpful, like physically essential right now, like, making masks, or if they were textile artists, that's the kind of stuff that they've transitioned to for the time being. And I think part of it is just to stay busy. And then part of it is to feel like you're contributing in that way.
Of course, I think that's really important. This sort of community ethos is really important. Unfortunately, this is also a time when some people have sort of taken advantage of the situation. Mm-hmm. So they are sort of using it. But then I think there's been a big backlash against that. Some people to say that, do something pro bono, do something for free.
Well, and there's a lot, man, we have so much to talk about. We have to finish. And I want to address Yayoi's question.
Yes,
but just before, I just want to say there's this one artist that I follow who is a woman of color. She comes from a community that has traditionally done, manual work and kind of textile work. And she found herself, because her practice has been, she's shifted in some ways to textiles. In some of her work, she was making masks. And, one time she made a comment on Instagram that really struck me. It was like, why is it still, women of color who are being called on to make these essential items, to contribute pro bono, to do this manual work for free. And of course, everyone is contributing in their own way, but it was just interesting. That really resonated with me. Okay, last, so you always said post-COVID, what part of the art world ecosystem will change the most and how?
Oh, that's an interesting question, post-COVID. I mean, if we just take the example of what happened at MoMA, the entire education team, or majority, were laid off. So that's definitely where sort of seeing where priorities lie, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. We think about audience. We spend a lot of time talking about education. That's where all you get the philanthropic grants all come from. I mean, I've worked in institutions.
Well, I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not going in one way or other, but I just wanted to say, is it all of the education departments? Some are they freelancers?
There were conflicting reports. I believe it was a good proportion.
Right. And it might have been like contractors, docents, this sort of thing. But regardless, I mean, I think it's interesting because museums are given the mandate to be 501c3s, to be nonprofits, to get the tax exemption, because your mandate is to educate the public. That should be part of your mission.
Exactly.
And so for the education department to, this happened in other institutions as well, for them to see the first rounds in some ways of these furloughs or layoffs, that is very, very sad.
For sure. And another thing is that audiences are so important. And now these institutions cannot suffice without audiences as well. Mm-hmm. So that's something that will completely sort of change. I mean, I'm dying to go to museums. That's one thing that is my, not only my career, but my pastime, it's my passion. And I can't do that right now. So the sort of audience dynamic will shift, I think, and how institutions can better support and sort of cater to audiences. I think that will definitely be a shift that we'll see.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I am so grateful for you. This flew by, and I'm so happy we did it. It was like a great, stimulant for my brain. And and I love you. I appreciate you, and
Thank
I hope
you.
you're
Likewise.
safe, and can't wait to see you again really soon.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who are following, I am going to post this on my stories, so you'll be able to see it for the next 24 hours, and then I plan on putting it on IGTV. But I've never done this before, so, cut me some slack if it doesn't really work out. And please share with people that this is happening. Tomorrow we have Susan Laney, who is the director of Laney Contemporary Fine Art, a wonderful gallery down in Savannah, Georgia. What I really want to do with this series is to hear from voices that are outside of New York. I mean, we started with Sara in New York, but of course she brings a global perspective. Later this week, we'll have Philip Tanari, who is the director of the UCCA Contemporary Art Center in Beijing.
He's still there?
He's there, and I believe they've reopened recently. So I really want to hear from friends in Asia because they are a couple of months ahead of where we are in the U.S. in terms of their society being on lockdown and kind of emerging out of it. Yeah. So I hope all of you will join for those talks. And I got talks for every single day going into early May.
So exciting! Yeah.
Who knew? Yeah. So maybe. Pardon?
People want to talk.
I think so. I think people want to engage. So thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.